Hello and welcome to Logan Sounds Off. Today on Logan Sounds Off, I have Jake Burns. Jake, how are you?
I'm grand, thanks, Logan. How's yourself?
I'm very good, thank you for asking. So, for those who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, blimey, where to start? Okay, I'm the lead singer, guitar player, main songwriter for Stiff Little Fingers, band from Belfast in Ireland. We formed in 1977, so we've been doing this a long time. I also occasionally play with a side project band called Dead Men Walking, which is myself, Segs and Ruffy from the Ruts, and Kirk Brandon from Spear of Destiny, Theatre of Hate. Um, there's not really much more to tell. That's pretty much who I want to do.
Cool. Well, we're going to delve into all of that now in the interview. So, first off, I want to start growing up in the late 60s and the early 70s. You listened to a lot of Dr. Feelgood and Rory Gallagher. But
Mhm.
was there any other bands and musicians that were really important to you at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of started out like most kids at the time. You just listened to the radio and stuff. So I was listening to all the sort of what was the pop songs of the day. I didn't realize actually until I looked back on it that a lot of the stuff I bought was on the Tamla Motown label. So, but I would never have considered myself a soul boy. To me, it was just pop music. And yeah, Rory was the turning point that sort of led me away from pop music and down the guitar playing road. I saw Taste's farewell concert, not live. I saw it on the television, and that kind of changed my path basically. The thing was as well. I mean, where I was growing up, most of my friends were slightly older than I was, so while I really should have been, listening to pop music, I then started, big thanks to Rory, like I said, and these older friends, I started listening to heavier bands and stuff. People like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, all those guys.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, Black Sabbath probably were my favorite band when I was very young. Um, just because they were the loudest. They were the ones that annoyed my man and dad the most. So that was why I liked them.
I see. That's a very, very unique mix of things, especially with Motown. I heard
Yeah.
that you like Motown. Thank you for bringing that up. But you mentioned there about Rory Gallagher, and you stopped in your tracks while first listening to Rory Gallagher. It really was a big experience in your life. But do you think there were any other musicians or bands that you did this before or after where you just stopped in your tracks listening to them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, like I said, I don't think things really hit you as hard as the first time that something, really gets under your skin. So any other band or musician that I heard after that, it was just a step further on the journey, if you like. Rory was very much the turning point. Anything beyond that was kind of just another step on the journey. So I'm guessing what you're referring to was when I first heard the Clash. I mean, the uh, the whole thing with punk rock, by the time punk rock happened, you mentioned Dr. Feelgood earlier, and the Feelgoods were definitely my favorite band by the time the Sex Pistols and that rolled around. Because by that stage I'd gotten fed up with listening to all the guitar heroes. I was bored with 10-minute guitar solos, and then there was the drum solo and the bass solo and all that nonsense. Um, and I wanted to just get back to listening to songs again. I think it was probably the pop song thing, from when I was really young, that was kicking back in again. And so when I first heard the Pistols and the Damned and the Ramones and that, I thought it was great because it was a kick in the backside for all the self indulgent bands that had been really boring me. So, but I didn't see where it was going to go. Logan. I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be. It was. I thought it was what rock music needed at the time. I thought it needed a kick in the backside, but I didn't see what it was going to achieve beyond about 6 months. You can only outrage people for so long. And then I heard the Clash, and they were writing songs about their lives, and that to me was really important. I mean, it kind of goes back to, the first things that your English teacher tells you at school, which when you're writing composition and stuff, which is to write about what you know. And that way, you make your point better, and it's believable because it's what you know about. And obviously, when the Clash, were writing about themselves and their lives, and particularly a song like "Career Opportunities" on their first album, that really hit home with me, and that was when I saw that there was longevity to it. There was more to it than just trying to get up people's noses. I mean, again, but that was an important part of it, though. That goes back to what I was saying about, the reason I really like a lot of the reason I really like Black Sabbath was the fact that my parents hated them. And, so anything that annoys your man, dad, when it comes to music is a grand thing as far as I was concerned. And it should be. I mean, that's what rock and roll should be about. It should be about annoying, partly about annoying the older generation,
Very interesting you say that, because you mentioned in an interview before, and I thought this was very interesting. Your dad used to be a big fan of Hank Williams, and
Yeah.
you didn't like Hank Williams.
No.
So, you also mentioned though in the interview that you had got some inspiration from him and musically influenced from him in ways because it was around you. And I just wanted to ask,
Yeah.
could you explain that a bit further?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Hank Williams, for example, I mean, and he's a very good example, is, yeah, my dad was a huge fan. And I think mainly because my dad was a huge fan, I just didn't want to listen, I just thought it was shite, basically. And then, of course, as I got older and became a songwriter, effectively, I found that more and more I was listening via actually a lot of old blues guys. Again, this is thanks to Rory Gallagher. I started listening to where did Rory get his inspirations from, and so I started listening to the likes of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and Willie Dixon and all these guys that Rory had been listening to. And I found I really liked it, and also I found through the words and the form of it, I thought, this is getting dangerously close to Hank Williams territory here. And, and and then I went back and listened to the Hank Williams records, and that was like, shite, my dad was right. This is actually really good. It took years. And now, I think, there was one time I turned up back at the house, back at visiting in Ireland, and I turned up at the house wearing a Hank Williams t-shirt, and I thought my dad was going to explode laughing. He was like, sort of, when did you start liking that fella? And I had to admit that after many years, my dad was right and I was wrong. Hank Williams was, in fact, pretty damn brilliant.
That is very interesting. Now, this was this was something that I never heard before. With Stiff Little Fingers, originally when I was starting, it was called Highway Star.
Yeah.
And that was a name taken off a Deep Purple record.
Right.
And then it moved on to Fast, but then it moved on to Stiff Little Fingers.
Yeah.
And that was a name of Pure Mania, a record by the Vibrators. Were you always looking out at like track names to try and get band name ideas? I'm just wondering.
Well, the thing is, I mean, that's probably the hardest part of starting a band, is to think of a decent name. It's not as easy as you'd think, and yeah, I mean, Highway Star, like you said, was taken from the Deep Purple song. Interestingly enough, we never played the Deep Purple. We didn't play anything by Deep Purple because it was too damn complicated. We weren't very good. So, anything that was too tricky, we just tended to avoid it. And with Stiff Little Fingers, that came about, yeah, we were going to call ourselves The Fast, which sounded like a punky name. It sounded like a good idea to have the in the name as well. That seemed like a return to pop groups of old, so like the Damned, the Stranglers, the Ramones, even though they were actually just called Ramones, but either way, so it sounded like a good idea to have the in the name. And then we found out that there was when we'd already booked our first gig. That was the thing. We booked our first gig at a bar in Belfast, in Ballyhackamore, called Paddy Lamb's Lounge, and we were called The Fast. And then we found out that there was a band in New York called The Fast. And I mean, I don't know where we got the idea that these fellas in New York were ever going to hear about us playing in a wee bar in Belfast, but we decided we'd probably best change the name. But we couldn't think of a name. We couldn't think of anything really. And the fella kept phoning us up because he wanted to put an ad in the paper. He was, he had a bar to run. He was putting an ad for the week, who was playing there during the week. And Henry was the only, they were the only folks in the band who had a phone. So we used to run all the business side of things out of Henry's house. And I happened to be over there one afternoon when this fella phoned up and he said, look, I'm putting this ad in the paper and I don't know what these are called. And so literally, like you said, it was from Pure Mania by the Vibrators. And that record just happened to be lying by the phone. So I grabbed it and just ran my finger down all the names of the songs and came across Stiff Little Fingers and said, tell them we're called Stiff Little Fingers and we'll think of something better after the first show. And so we did it. And amazingly, we got reviewed in, I think, the Belfast Telegraph or some local paper anyway. And it was a really good review. Now, in those days, to get gigs, you had to convince the guy who ran the bar or the club that you were any good. And nothing was better than turning up with the local newspaper and going, look, it says here we're really good. So as a consequence of which we were stuck with the damn name. And I've never liked it. And it's 46 years later and I still don't like it. I thought it looked much cooler when I saw it. People used to write it on the back of their jackets and they shortened it to SLF. I thought that looked better. But it's a bit of a mouthful and it doesn't really mean anything. And people have read so much into it. You'd have to ask John Ellis, who actually wrote the song, what he was thinking of when he wrote it. But people started to write all sorts of things, particularly Americans. When you first came here, they were trying to read it all. Everything was about Ireland and the Troubles, and they thought it was all something to do with that. But nah, mate, it was a name from a song. We just took it because we couldn't think of anything else,
But there you have it. I thought that was so interesting. And for me, who's been growing up with Stiff Little Fingers since when I was 4 or 5, and my dad, this tape he bought in, I think, at least the late 70s or
right.
the early 60s. So to now know the Stiff Little Fingers, the name came from that, is very interesting.
Yeah.
So now I'd like to move on to a very interesting fact that I learned, that you guys had an acting debut on the BBC Play for Today television show. And you were on that for one episode and you played the band. How did that come about?
I think you're pushing it by saying we were acting. I mean, well, certainly what little acting there wasn't very good. It came about. We just got a phone call. I got a phone call from our manager at the time who said the BBC had been on to him, and there was a playwright from Northern Ireland, a guy called Stuart Parker, who'd written this play, and there was a small part in it for me. He said they'd actually written it with us in mind to be the band, but the band needed to be sort of, introduced into the play. So I had to play, I think I had about 4 or 5 lines in this thing. And at the time, it seemed like everybody that was in a band was acting. I mean, there were those that were good at it, like David Bowie and Sting and folk like that. And then there was me, who was awful and shocking. I mean, it didn't help that they got me drunk. That didn't help. But it was, it just came about because this guy, the play was set in Belfast, and the idea was, I think that it mainly centered around these 2 women who, through a number of circumstances and coincidences, their lives intertwine over the course of this one day. And the lassie who was playing one of the women was supposed to be my girlfriend in the play, so they kind of needed to. That was the connection to get the band in. And what was really interesting about it, from my point of view, we filmed it in Belfast, and it was the time the Troubles were still going on, and there was a couple of scenes that were supposed to show how derelict Belfast was at the time, and they couldn't find anywhere derelict enough. It wasn't wrecked enough. So they had to film them in Liverpool. I'm sure the people of Liverpool were delighted to know that their place looked more like a bomb site than Belfast did. But So there you go.
Wow. So after that little piece of, I'm not going to call it acting, but
No, please
on
don't. It's
BBC
terrible.
Paper today, on that anyways, after that, like there was a lot of success with the debut album Inflammable Material, which like that got a massive response. And for anybody who is in the punk community or loves punk music, they'll know that that's one of the most iconic albums out there regarding punk music in general. So my question is for you is how did you deal with that? Like, was it overwhelming, or was it did you kind of roll with it?
To be honest, it's like a lot of those things. At the time, I think because you're young and you feel indestructible, you think you can take on the world. It kind of felt we thought that's what was going to happen. I know that sounds big headed, but it didn't seem big headed at the time. But just simply because we had no idea how the music business worked. I mean, obviously now looking back on it, I know how difficult it actually is for bands to get started and for you to get that sort of reaction to anything you do, much less the first thing you do out of the block. But at the time, I think being in Belfast actually helped because we were isolated. I mean, one thing, it was a big hindrance because you couldn't get record labels to come see you play. It was to get any sort of coverage at all. You had to go. It seemed like you had to go over to the UK to England, to London to actually play in front of these guys. But what was good about it was we were isolated from all the nonsense that went with the music business. So we had no idea that, this wasn't how it worked. I think we'd all watched too many episodes of The Monkees or something, so we felt like, you form a band, you play a few shows, you make a record, you get signed, you make a record, the record's a hit, you go on tour and that's it. And everybody lives happily ever after. And yeah, we thought that was just how it worked. So it was perfectly natural to us to put the record out and the record was a hit. Subsequently you find out that it's not as easy as that. We were just very, very, very lucky. I mean, we were in the right place at the right time, and so much of the music business is luck and being in the right place at the right time. And so I think, yeah, of the two reactions that you suggested, we probably just rolled with it, because we didn't know any better.
That's incredible. Like, I mean, that's a really cool explanation. I love that. And after Stiff Little Fingers, after tons of albums, after a lot of success with all of your albums here, these were the first five.
Right.
You just, for if you don't know who SLF is, they are that's the first five albums. And you can get that in the original album series, and that's brilliant. That was actually the first CD I ever bought, and I still listen to it to this day. But after all of that, you moved on to Jake Burns and the Big Wheel. So how was it like moving from one band to another? Did you want to do something completely different, or did you want to retain a certain kind of feel to it?
The idea was to do something really different. We'd done Stiff Little Fingers for a length of time, and I mean, to be honest, really looking back on it, probably splitting up was a bit of a mistake. What we should have done was just take a year or so off. I mean, the main reason was, like you said, the first album came out in '79, and by the time we got round to now, then we'd done obviously Inflammable Material, Nobody's Heroes, Hanks, Go For It, and Now Then, and it was still only 1982. So we'd rattled through a lot of work in a very short period of time, and we were living in each other's pockets. And like a lot of bands and a lot of young people as well. I mean, you go through you've got this to come, but you go through a lot of growing up between the ages of like 18 and 23 or whatever, 24. And we just weren't the same people that we were when we started, When we started, it was just a laugh and a bit of fun. And then it became your job and other people are relying on you. And I'm not saying the pressure got to us, but little things became big things that they shouldn't have done. You know, little disagreements became big arguments. And we were sick of the sight of each other, to be honest. And that was kind of why I wanted to go away. And I didn't want to completely forget about Stiff Little Fingers, because obviously that was, you know, what had put me to wherever I was. But I did want to, musically, I wanted to do something completely different. And that's why, you know, we brought in a keyboard player straight away. I mean, it was very much modelled. The band model was very much modelled on Elvis Costello and the Attractions. So it was, you know, it was a guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, as opposed to two guitars, and also I wanted to use a lot of harmony vocals. I wanted that expanded as that band went on. We ended up at one point there was the four of us, then there was a saxophone player, so that was up to five of us, and then again at one point we had three girl singers as well. So there's like 8 people, you know, on the stage, which was crazy. Sounded pretty good, but it was crazy. But unfortunately, it was, you know, that's I was saying earlier about, you know, you form a band, you do some shows, you make a record, it's a hit. We did that, and we made the record, and it wasn't a hit, and suddenly you realize how hard it was, you know. Yeah, so that, you know, that kind of ran its course. We ran out of money. We ran out of, you only live on enthusiasm for so much, for so long, and eventually, you know, people just lost the heart in it. And also around that time, I got a phone call from Ali McMurdy, who I hadn't seen in like 3 or 4 years, and he basically said, "Look, we noticed that a lot of bands from our era who had split up, people like Buzzcocks and, in this instance, the Tom Robinson Band, were getting back together again and playing, and they hadn't played in forever. And we did our first major UK tour supporting the Tom Robinson Band, so there was a lot of emotional baggage there. Anyway, Ali called me up and said, "Look, the Tom Robinson Band are playing tomorrow night. Do you want to come see them? We haven't seen each other apart from Alice. It'd be nice just to meet up and have a beer." And we were actually playing. The Big Wheel had a gig that night, so I said, "Look, yeah, we're playing, but you're right. It would be lovely to catch up. So why don't we arrange to meet the following week?" So we did, and over the course of that evening, you know, one beer led to two, led to four, led to too many, and by the end of the night, we were steaming. And we were talking about all these bands getting back together, and we decided that we were, in our drunken stupor, we decided that we were better than any of them. It's just, again, you know, all the old youthful exuberance was coming back again, fueled by too much beer. And anyway, we decided that it would be a great idea to put the band back together again. Of course, I woke up the next morning thinking, did I just say I was going to put the band back together again? Terrible headache, bad idea. And the phone rang, and Ali said he'd pretty much called everybody, and they were all keen. I think I'd called Henry. God knows what he made of me calling him that time of the night. But everybody was keen to do it. They all thought it was a great idea. So it was kind of, you know, we went back into it with, it was kind of put your toe in the water and see, to be honest, because we'd no idea if anybody was going to be interested. None of us were doing anything really, you know, music wise or any wise, and we were all actually broke, to be completely honest with you. We were skint, and Christmas was just around the corner. This would have been about, I think, October of 1987 when we came up with this idea. Christmas was just around the corner. I wanted to get back to Ireland for Christmas, and I didn't have the money. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And when this was suggested, and we went to an agent, and they said, "I'm sure we can at least book you some clubs to play." We said, "Well, can you make it finish in Belfast? That'd be great." So that was basically the plan, to be honest with you, was to play some clubs and finish in Belfast so we could get home and see our folks for Christmas. That was as much as we expected, and we did that. We put the tickets on sale, and they sold out so fast that we had to move back into the major venues that we'd been playing back in like 1980, and they all sold out. And at this point, we got terrified, you know, because we hadn't played together, and to suddenly go from, you know, what seems like a great idea when you've got a skin full of beer in a pub, to be suddenly faced with the reality of it, you know, in the daylight, in this cold light of day, and it's bigger than you thought it was going to be, was really scary. So we decided we needed a few warm-up shows, and we came up with the idea of let's go to Germany. We'd never meant anything in Germany, never really sold any real, tickets or anything. And they booked 7 nights over there. And they were all in pretty major venues, and they all sold out as well. So there was no chance of doing it, slow on small scale. So then we had to take it really seriously. We just booked a lot of rehearsal time. I went in and just tried to remember what the hell we'd done, all those years ago, and it went so well that at the end of it, we decided, well, let's see if we can move this forward, and that was in 1987. And I'm still here talking to you about it today. So,
Brilliant. Now, I actually want to move on. So you spoke about Stiff Little Fingers and also Jake Burns and the Big Wheel. So now I'd like to move on to your solo career. So you released your debut in 2006. So what inspired you to write a record as a solo artist?
That was a previous manager's idea. I'd written a couple of songs that I didn't think really fitted Stiff Little Fingers, and I just had them kicking about in the house, and I played them to him. And one was a song that did actually end up on a Stiff Little Fingers record. It was a song called The Roaring Boys, which did end up on a Stiff Little Fingers album. But the other one I'd written was Drinking Again, and it was kind of it sounded a bit like the Pogues or something like that, I suppose. But again, I'm not even sure if they were around at the time. They had probably started. This is so it shows you how long ago it was when I wrote it. The Pogues were definitely around, but all these other bands that sounded like the Pogues definitely weren't when I wrote the song. And he was like, "That sounds great, but it's not going to fit the band." Why don't and it might even have been Dolphin's idea that if you've got any more of these, you should think about doing a solo record. Anyway, it took a while, and we shopped it around, and we got a couple of people who wanted to put it out, and then for one reason or another, all those deals fell through. And to be honest with you, Logan, I just forgot about it. I mean, I'd written the songs, but none of them fitted Stiff Little Fingers, so it got put on the back burner, and it stayed there for years and years and years. And life moved on. I moved to America. I moved to Chicago. That manager went away. The drummer went away. So it was basically a whole new band. And what had happened was we ended up signed back on EMI. And some of the folks that worked there, not so much on the Hope Street record, but certainly by the time we did the guitar and drum album, we had a couple of people at the label who were supporters of the band, and it was one of them said to me in passing, he said, "Didn't you say something to me about you had written a solo record years ago? Whatever happened to that?" And I just started laughing. Went, "Oh, geez, I remember that." Yeah, I said, "Oh, I've got the songs somewhere. They're in the house somewhere." And he said, "Well, you'd maybe be interested in putting that out." And I'd only done home demos of the thing. And they went away and they came back and said, "Look, we haven't got any money really to do this, but if you can find a way of recording it, really cheaply, we'll happily put it out." And so it was kind of a throw it out there. Nobody's really going to be that interested in it. And so I recorded it in bits and pieces. It was recorded in a studio in Chicago. But I couldn't actually block book the studio time, which is what you would normally do. You'd normally just go in and say, "Right, I need 3 or 4 weeks in here, just block it out," and you go in and you work. It's like you go to work every day. We couldn't do that. What we had to do was use downtime. What downtime is you go in when the studio's closed, basically. So you're going in at sort of weird times of day or night, just when nobody else is using it. And as a consequence of that, we got it pretty much for free. Now, the other problem I had was I was in Chicago on my own. My band were all in all over the place. Well, they were all in England. And that's not true. The guitar player was in Los Angeles, but it may as well have been in England. It's just as far the other direction. And I didn't really want to use them anyway. The whole point of a solo record was to use other musicians. And so I ended up with, grabbing people out of other bands, or there were a couple of Irish bars in Chicago that had sessions on a Sunday afternoon, or during the week in the evening, and I started haunting these places and just spotting the better players, and then sidling up to them when they'd finished and saying, "Would you like to come along and play on my record for me?" And they did, yeah, amazingly, and they were all really good players. But it was a bit, patched together, to be honest with you, Logan. I mean, it would have been a much better record if we'd had to, been able to block the studio out for 3 or 4 weeks and just concentrate on making that, because, it could be as much as 2 weeks between sessions, recording sessions, and you may only get like 2 hours, which sounds like a fair amount of time, but in general, if you're having to set up and break down every time you're in there, it just made it very, very difficult to make the record. So I was amazed it got made, and surprisingly, it got received quite well, considering it had nothing in common with Stiff Little Fingers at all, really. Yeah.
I have to say though, it does have a very nice sound, like really, really lovely. And I really like that album actually. In general, it's very good. And I have a couple more questions left. But one
Sure.
is that you've inspired like really really, really famous bands like Green Day. You've inspired Nirvana. You actually inspired Bono to go and start U2. He went to an SLF gig and he decided he wanted to start U2. How does it feel knowing that you meant so much to so many different people, including these bands now? Some are actually now and some have finished up but are still known very well today. How does it feel to be meaning that much to people?
It's very flattering, and particularly, I mean, the bands you mentioned are all huge, and it's great that you've managed to mean something that to other musicians. I mean, that I think is probably the most gratifying part of any of this. It's not so much that all those bands you mentioned were so popular. I think it's the fact that they are other musicians and that they've gone down the road you went down, as a consequence of hearing us, and I think that's basically, that was how I felt about Rory Gallagher, and in later years I was lucky enough, because we were on the same record label, I was lucky enough to get to meet and to get to know Rory a bit, and I think he was a very shy man. He was a very very quiet man, and I think he was slightly embarrassed by the fact that especially after I'd had a couple of beers, I'd start saying to him, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for you, and all that. It was kind of like, yeah, shut up, Jake, have another drink, So it was, and I think it's a bit like that when other bands start saying that sort of thing about yourself. You're sort of like, well, that's great, and I'm glad you liked it, and I'm glad you took something from it. It does mean a lot. It means a lot when other bands say that you influenced them. Having said that, of course, there's been some bands that said we influenced them who I think are bloody awful, and I'm like, dear God, I wish we hadn't bothered, But I'm not going to name names.
Wow, though, brutal honesty. I love it. And I have 2 quick questions for you now. So just some fun questions. So you are very well known for it with Stiff Little Fingers, White Christmas. You did a cover of White Christmas, and it's actually live on All the Best. So I have to ask, because at the time of recording, it's the 6th of December. So in 19 days, it's going to be Christmas Day. So I'm very excited. And what do you have a favorite Christmas song? Do you?
It's not that. I mean, that came about because at the time we used to do, we used to do things that we called silly encores. What it was we found very early on, because Stiff Little Fingers was so sort of, in your face, the crowd would get really riled up. And so by the time it came around to, if they wanted us to come on and do an encore, it felt a bit like, if we push this too far, the roof will come off this place. It's not, not in a good way. So we just started playing stupid songs as encores. I mean, I think that on that record there's Running Bears, another one. We used to play Merle Haggard's Okie from Muskogee. We did Tiger Feet by Mud. We played like a load of just throwaway things. And that particular White Christmas, we'd only rehearsed it that afternoon for like 10 minutes. I think it really shows in the recording. With regards to, do I have a favorite Christmas song? I like a lot of Christmas music, as long as I don't have to listen to it for more than a couple of weeks. Yeah, I mean, the original White Christmas is definitely a great song. Obviously, the Pogues' Fairy Tale is particularly resonant this year, with Shane just having sadly passed away. But I think probably the one that for people of my generation that really is the one that sort of makes you smile and want to get up and make a fool of yourself, dad dancing around the place, it would be Slade's "Merry Christmas, Everybody." Just because it was one of the first sort of irreverent Christmas hits. Up to that point, you either got the Christmas carols or you got the Phil Spector record. And that was, there was nothing then in between until, Slade turned up with the daft hats and the tartan trousers, that would probably be the one that I really still makes me smile.
Very cool. To be honest, myself, just I love Christmas. Like, I am Christmas mad, and I love Christmas music. So whoa, you actually answered that very quickly. Because if somebody asked me what's your favorite Christmas song, I would be thinking for so long because there's so many. So thank you for that.
Well, there are. You're right. There's tons of them. And it's one of those things. It's like I've always wanted to write one, but they're really difficult to write. Because you either write cheesy nonsense or you get caught up in mistletoe and Santa's elves and shit like that. So it's like it's it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Whoa, though. In fairness, I've always thought if I was to write a Christmas song, it'd be really hard because you got to think there's a tone that's there. But no, my last question, and
Mhm.
this is just for musicians out there who are struggling or are trying to get a bit more popular. What tips would you give them?
No, that's a good question, and it's one that I'm not really qualified to answer anymore, and I'll tell you why. Because the music business itself has changed so much since we started. I mean, when we started, there was almost, it sounds a crazy thing to say, but there was almost a career path you could follow. Like I said, you'd form your band, you'd rehearse, you'd learn your songs, then you'd go out, you'd play a few shows. If you were lucky, you'd get a decent review. Maybe you start to build up a bigger audience. Maybe get some interest from a record label. You make a record, gets played on the radio, and so that was the path. Now, with the fact that what's the point in making records these days, because they instantly get put on the internet and copied, so nobody actually buys records anymore, really. So I really wouldn't know where you start. I mean, a lot of people are able to make records almost in their bedrooms now, which I would have loved the chance to have done when I was younger. Just simply to be able to actually make a record, I suppose. But it seems like I honestly genuinely don't know how you would start out these days in the music business. I would hate to be starting now because I wouldn't know where to begin. All I can say is, particularly if you're going to be the songwriter in the band, because I guess that won't change unless AI, learns to write songs, which I'm sure it already has. But the one piece of advice I would give anybody that was particularly songwriters, now not so much other musicians, although I guess it applies across the board, is it's all right to be influenced by other people. I mean, we talked about Rory, we talked about Dr. Feelgood and the Clash, and that in my instance, we talked about other bands that have been inspired by us, and that's fine. But don't just slavishly copy those people. I mean, when you start out, that's what you do, because you're learning your trade, But the quicker you can find your own voice, the better you're going to be. And it goes back to, again, what I said earlier about, my old school teacher saying to me that to write about what you know. Write about what you know, write in your own voice, and write from the heart. Because if you don't believe it, nobody that listens to it's going to believe it, I know that's, at least that way, at the end of the day, if you do get around to making a record and stuff, you're not going to be embarrassed by it, and trust me, there's been a few that I've been involved in that when I hear them, I'm like, oh dear God, really? Did we actually do that? So, like I said, write in your own voice, and be honest with yourself,
Well, guys, there you have it. A perfect bunch of tips there from Jake Burns. Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. I really
My
appreciate it.
pleasure.
It's been
Absolutely my
amazing
pleasure.
to
Thank you.
interview. Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye now.